Um, I enlisted in the service in the end of June of 1942. Went to Little Rock, Camp Robinson outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, and spent July and August getting basic training. Went from there to Little Falls, Minnesota, Camp Ripley, and for a month, and that's where I got formed into a Air Force MP company. After a month, we went to Columbus, Ohio, and did some more training, and spent. I was at Lockbourne Air Base. I had a chance to ride a motorcycle for the first time and watch real good pilots fly B-26s. At that time, they were having an awful lot of trouble with they were dumping B-26s outside of Tampa, Florida, because the guys had a lot of trouble flying those. But the guys that flew them at Lockbourne, it seemed like they'd get to the end of the runway, go down the runway, and they didn't take off. It looked like they were just retract the landing gear and veer up. They did a terrific job in flying those. After 3 months at Columbus, where I went to New Jersey, spent a couple of days getting prepared to go overseas. Got on a railroad train, went into the dock on the Jersey side of the Hudson, got on a lighter boat, went across the river onto a pretty big passenger liner, and took off for England. And of course, it turned into a huge convoy, with probably maybe 100 more ships. You could see the destroyers on the outs, all the passenger ships are all in the center of the convoy, and there's a lot of freighters surrounding us also. After 7 days, we could still see the lights out of Newfoundland. We went past Greenland and Iceland and into the Irish Sea. At one point along the way, there were some terrific explosions behind us in the convoy. Now, whether those are depth charges or actually torpedoes, I never did find out. But the North Atlantic in January is not a very happy place to be. Anyway, we landed in Bristol, England. Got onto air base over there with the 305th Bomb Group, the Chilveston Air Base, and the first base commander, the colonel there, was Curtis LeMay, who later became head of a wing in England, and then went over the Pacific, was the head of the 20th Air Force that dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, and ran the Berlin airlift after the war when Berlin was shut down, and then later became head of SAC in Nebraska. After spending a little bit over a year at that base with the P-17s, and at one point, actually, they pulled one squadron off of the daylight bombing, and they were going to have this squadron drop leaflets at night. Well, they had to do some practice flying, and I'd never been in an airplane before. A buddy of mine and I checked out parachutes and went out on a flight line where they were warming up a plane and asked if we could ride along. Now the gunners didn't have to go along on these, so they weren't there. Just the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier. They asked if we could come along, and they said, "Come on aboard." And I and the other guy climbed on and dropped our chutes in the waist of the plane near where the waist gunners are, would have been, and went up for my first airplane ride. Well, it was quite thrilling, flying over a blacked out country, and it got kind of boring in the back end of the plane, so I walked across the catwalk that goes through the bomb bay, and stood on the front of the catwalk and a bulkhead in front of the pilot's compartment, and it's kind of stooped there, standing up and watching him over the pilot's and co-pilot's shoulder. And eventually we started doing what they call touches and goes, where the plane lands and touches the wheels, guns the engines, takes off, flies around the more. And so we did that about 4 or 5 times. And there again, the ground and all blacked out. There's eventually, as you came down, there was little tiny lights along each side of the runway, but when you're up high, they were invisible. And so that was my first airplane ride. Later, I went to another base where they had B-24s, and at that time, where they used to bring convoys of 40 or 50 big trucks, all with bombs on them, and they had a collar, 2 collars around the bomb. They didn't have the nose that trigger that explodes the bomb, or the tail fins that those are attached later. But so they just used to come and kick them off the back of the truck. And this one time they had some extra sensitive bombs, and eventually in about 20 minutes, that whole bomb dump went up. It was the only time in my life that I actually saw air compressed and it looked like bubbles coming up out of the bomb dump. I was way over on the other side of the base, so I had a bird's eye seat. There was I never did know officially how many people died, but reading later in the history why they said only 5 did. That I can't believe, because there was holes in the ground the size of excavations for a basement, and eventually, after they closed that base, and one more thing, I mean that the force of the explosions, that the airplanes on that side of the base, it broke them at the edge of the wings. The wings are touching the ground. There are some hangars over there that are an angle iron framework, and they were covered with corrugated metal. And the whole field was covered with triangles of corrugated metal that got blown off of the hangars and, and was laying all over the ground. And then I ended up at another B-24 base, and eventually the war was over, and we got on a train and went to Glasgow, got on a lighter and got on the Queen Mary and came home. We again landed in New York. We got on the end of the dock, got back on a ferry going across the river, and got on a train, and ended up for a couple of days in a base in New York. They sent me back to the Midwest. I got a furlough after coming home, and went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and for a couple of weeks, and then down to Texas for a week or so in near Abilene, and went to a base a little bit further west in Sweetwater, Texas, at Sweetwater Air Base, and that was the base where the women ferry pilots were trained. They were actually civilians, but they were working for the Air Force, and they were some very good pilots there. They learned how to fly almost anything that we had. They used to fly them across the United States to the departure points, and our pilots would pick them up and take them to the war operations wherever they were needed. Uh, uh, After end of October, I was sent to a base in northern Texas, Shepherd Field. I got discharged, and I came home, and that kind of a brief my service in World War II.